All right, everybody, we're going to get started. Ryan, if you could pull that door closed a little bit. Remember to order from the servers who are in this room. Don't exit the dining room. We need to keep track of our sales. Thank you for coming to the annual meeting of the THS. I'm gonna be distracted by the number of people that are coming in from Zoom land. Actually, Herpers are always late, I think. Okay. Which means, Craig, that as you're speaking, I'm going to be potentially letting folks in to the Zoom room, FYI. So welcome. I think most of you know who we are and our mission statement, but if you're not, welcome. And this is our mission statement. We are dedicated to conservation, research, and education concerning the amphibians and reptiles of Arizona and Mexico. Being in the Sonoran Desert, there are tons of indigenous place names that are named after Herps. Tumamoc Hill is the hill of the horned lizard. The Catalinas are known as Babadoag, which means Toad Sitting Mountain. And if we look at Push Peak, we can see exactly why. But for example, the capital of the O'odham Nation is originally known as Tortoise Stuck in the Rock, which is very telling considering that the number one non-human cause of death for tortoises is getting stuck in rocks, falling from rocks, or encountering a mountain lion. We have a beautiful publication called The Sonoran Herpetologist, and this is the most recent issue. And the cover is photographed by our member, Jim Rorabaugh. I just can't put it anywhere safe, really. So this is how many people we've reached out to this year. And admittedly, this includes large events like the book festival and the Tucson Reptile and Amphibian Show. But we also do things like the Southern Arizona Research, Science, and Engineering Fair, little special engagements around Tucson. And I have to thank Patrick Brown because he has been instrumental in bringing our outreach programs back to life. And he's mostly done it by himself. Recently, he was able to get these wonderful banners printed. And this is from the Tucson Reptile and Amphibian Show. We have these really nifty display boxes, and we've really made our display very nice. And that's thanks to Patrick organizing this and getting these things printed. He's also the father of two and works full time as a firefighter on call. So that's no small feat. And I think a round of applause is very justified. So thank you again. Karina Hilliard recently became involved with the Friends of Rio Vista Park, which is a city park, Karina, right?
Yeah.
The end of Tucson.
Yeah, that is.
Cool. It's at the north end of Tucson Boulevard. I was approached by someone from this organization, and I didn't quite have the time. I brought it up at the board meeting we were at, and Karina and Ross decided that they would take this on. And so the result is that the Friends of Rio Vista Park now have an iNaturalist project that will help them understand the biodiversity of the city park and help them understand it and protect it more. So if you do iNaturalist, look out for the Friends of Rio Vista Conservation Plan. account. It pulls any observations from that area into their project. So thank you, Karina. We have some friends in Sonora. Recently, the state of Sonora organized their first state herp association, and they reached out to us. We get their bulletins, and they get our bulletin or our newsletter. If you're interested, if you read Spanish or want to learn to read Spanish, I can send those PDFs to you. I'm not sure how regularly they send them out, but I already have a couple or more than a couple. If you're interested, just let us know. And the QR code is for more information. They're going to have their first meeting in May. So if we want to do a field trip there, let's make it happen. This year, we sponsored or represented ourselves at different events. The folks at the Chiricahua Desert Museum graciously let us have a table and listed us as sponsors at the Biology of Pit Vipers 5. We sponsored 3 prizes for the Southern Arizona Research, Science, and Engineering Fair. And we also helped sponsor the Southwest Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation, where we also had a table where we were selling merchandise and information about our group. Ryan was there, and Karen Watson and some other folks were there as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, Maggie, this year we did finally donate to a genetic assessment of the captive assurance colony for Bolson tortoises at the Armendaris Ranch and Ladder Ranch. This is super important to understanding the health of the population, especially if the idea is to release animals into the wild. So this is one of the tortoises from that population that we visited, was it 2 years ago now? We funded some projects from our research fund. This is a photo from a Ditmar's horned lizard telemetry study that we funded. That project is more or less done, although people continue to go look for those animals and document them. But these are the 4 projects. Rediscovering the amphibians and reptiles of the Pinacate, which is a volcanic area just south of the border between Lukeville and Yuma. It's a remarkable area if you ever get a chance to go. And they're wanting to understand their herpetofauna. And estimating predator pressure on Salvador hexalepis using clay models and analyzing color pattern. This is a student project taking place at the Universidad de la Sierra. Joe Mendelson, very well-known herpetologist, is doing research out here in the Southwest. He spoke to us a while back on sidewinder evolution and locomotion, and now he's also looking at a novel virus that snakes are getting in the Southwest. And this is more or less not a pilot project, but it's one of the first projects that is seriously looking at the spread of this disease in the Southwest. So we're very proud that we are able to support that work from the get-go. And then the one that I'm really excited about is a review of the amphibians and reptiles of the Tohono O'odham Nation. This marks probably, I hope, the beginning of a relationship with the Tohono O'odham Nation and the youth, the community college there. I think it's very exciting, and I am looking forward to what Adrian is able to produce, and maybe he'll tell us about in the near future. Of course, we have to fund our favorite and one of our favorite amphibians, but this favorite amphibian, as you know, is being sought after for its psychedelic properties. This is the 4th or 5th season that we've funded Carla. she is the only researcher in all of the years that we've had this fund that has applied for funding. Not only has she provided detailed reports about the status or her progress, but it's a continuing study at many places around the state of Sonora, trying to understand, besides the most obvious of poaching, what are these toads and amphibians facing in the wilds, and what can we do to help them? And so she's involved students and also been very good at being on the local media and producing outreach materials for people in Sonora, because the problem, in a way, the problem will never go away, but there are a lot of social issues involved with this that we are continuing to monitor. And maybe next year I'll give an update about the situation. And my hope also is to coordinate that with a book launch that will be launching next year. About a book was written about this whole phenomenon of toad licking. So I've told you what we do with our money, and I hope that you continue to support us. Thank you for being here, and thank you for continuing to support us. We do support research and education outreach. It's the pillar of what we do. So if there's anybody in your family or friend circles that needs a herp merchandise, please buy some here on the Cream website. They all go to help us do what we do. And so with that, I'm going to, one more thing. Since we're having an election tonight, on the table are bios for the officers that are running for election. So if you want to learn more about us, there are 3 incumbents and 1 new candidate for treasurer. Have a read if you are so inclined and want to learn more about who you're voting for. But before we get to elections, I'm going to, there's one other thing. There's under one of the tables, under one of the chairs at your table, there is a red, each table, 1 chair, little round red sticker. If you have the red sticker, then you get to keep what's
Whoops, that's not gonna. No fighting now.
under the seat.
Under the seat. Patrick did them.
It's on a red chair.
Yeah, Patrick did them.
Okay, whoever has the red chair, the red sticker, get your extemporaneous Herp speech ready. You each have 5 minutes.
You got him?
Yeah, I think you can.
Okay, congratulations. And one of you from each table now owns a cute little tortoise.
Before you end, I need to.
I'll turn it back to you. I'm going to do a really boring thing, showing you some numbers. I've only made a few numbers, but if you want more, I've got lots. This is just to give you a general idea of our income and expenses in numbers. We get a good bank interest because we have a CD and the interest rates have been pretty good so far. Don't know what the future is going to be. Memberships are doing very well, and as you see, we really depend on our memberships. If you're up for renewal, oh, please stay with us. Merchandise has done very well this year, and I'll say a word about that on the next slide. Donations are down, and I'll say a word about that on my last slide. Expenses are fairly low this year because we pay for our database system every 2 years, and so next year there'll be a spike. We've got a few more capital expenses we have to deal with before the end of the year. But of course, Robert showed you some of the details about events and sponsorships and grants. And yeah, we have to pay for operations, but it's these events and sponsorships and grants that we really care about. And we really want to keep upping that. I don't have to say too much here because Robert already said. And our total assets are pretty good because our tradition has been that we accumulate some funds. And then when an opportunity comes locally for us to provide a session or a part of a symposium, that gives us the funding to do that. So I'm hoping that that will happen again too. I do absolutely want to say that that merchandise sale figure is due to some really heroic efforts by Karen, Ryan, Anthony, and Robert, who did a tremendous amount of work to get our merchandise sales up. And as if you couldn't guess this, we're going to be asking for end-of-year donations. I'm going to be sending out a plea later this week. And I think Robert has shown you lists of what we have done. We can do more. Not only would we love some donations, but if anyone here is interested in actually participating in some of these events, please see us. We'd love to have you work on them. That's it. Oh, that's it. There you go. Triple, do anything here?
I forgot the most, well, first of all, Maggie is stepping down as our treasurer. She's been with us for at least 10 years as treasurer. And being the treasurer is one of the lifelines of any organization, of course. But Ryan has decided to run for treasurer, and he will be coached and mentored by Maggie throughout that process. So we thank Maggie for that as well. Yes. I'm gonna put this here because I have some really special items that are for sale. They're not on the table. They're a bit pricey, but if you would like them, I'm going to tell you about them. Oh, thank you. Well, this is a special one. This isn't exorbitant. This is Michael Cardwell's Mojave Rattlesnake book. Michael is a local Sonan, a member of the Herps Society, great guy. He's considered one of the experts on Mojave rattlesnakes. And I know he probably doesn't like that word expert, but he spent a lot of time studying them. And that's why he is an expert. He wrote this great book. And if you would like to buy it for $20, he can autograph it for you. He didn't know I was going to say that, but this would be a great addition to your Herp library. And it'll be, yeah, anyways, he's here and he donated this. So thank you, Michael. We recently received a donation of some very, very special books. This is the first attempt to compile a guide or a book on the reptiles of Western North America by John Vandenberg. And it's in 2 big volumes. In its day, it was over $300. Today, these sell for somewhere around $200. His student, let's see, what was Slevin's first name? Anyone know? Joseph? No. Let's see. Hasn't even been torn open. The pages are sealed together. Anyways, Slevin, another very famous herpetologist, and student, did the amphibians of Western North America. So this is a rare set of the first Western guide to amphibians and reptiles. And that would be followed by Stebbins, the famous Stebbins. And soon it will be Bob Hansen and Jackson Shedd. So start your complete collection with this beautiful set from the library at Stanford. And these are going to sell for $275 for the whole set. And finally, but certainly not least, this is from the library at Stanford. This is the famous 2-volume set of rattlesnakes written by Lawrence Klauber, and he's inscribed the set to the Stanford Library. And these were donated by a former librarian to the Tucson Herp Society for fundraising. So I asked Bob Ashley, who is a reptile book dealer and antiquarian book person, and he said that at an auction that these would fetch somewhere near $1,500. But I am setting the price to $675. And these will be available to THS members first for the whole month of December and January, after which I will post them online for sale somewhere. So this is to let you know that you have first dibs on a very unique piece of history. And there you are. They're available to view here behind the podium. And so now you know. So next, we will begin elections. And Lee Oler is going to begin that. So Lee, are you ready? So someone on Zoom wants to buy Mike's book. I figure I should let them since they claimed it first. Is that all right with anyone? Everybody? All right, good. Do all members have a ballot? So the way this works is if you're a member in good standing, you can vote. If you're not a member, you can't vote. And you have to be here in person to vote, so no one on Zoom can do that. But we have a sufficient number here to conduct the election. And SCV is now approaching. All right. All right. I'm up here, right? You can hold the mic or just speak into it.
It feels so good. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, since I didn't have the opportunity to count these ballots, Robbie's going to do that, and I did see that there was a competition in the treasurer's race. So I think it's a friend of Ryan's, so, but we don't want him to think that it's just a wash and he's got this job already. You received one of these on the table. Please at least pick it up and leaf through it while Robbie's counting the votes. It shows that Robert Villa is incumbent THS president. Patrick Brown is the incumbent THS vice president. Ryan Perry is the treasurer candidate, and he's not an incumbent, so this is a very important race. And it shows him with a tortoise. What kind of tortoise? A Bolson, whatever your flavor is on that, it's fine with me. And then Karen Watson, who's the incumbent THS secretary. Karen has a very bad sinus infection tonight and is home with that. I think she'd rather be here with us. So that's who you have voted for, or the slate you voted for. Who's speaking? Yes, Allison.
Thank you all for doing this, but I also want to say, thank you for bringing Robert Villa when he was a student of yours.
A sixth grade student of mine, yes. You're welcome. I didn't know what I was getting into, but here we are. Yeah, he graduated. He did that. I was told I didn't get to his graduation, but I think he did graduate. I also wanted to, sorry about this. I also wanted to mention all the great things that the Tucson Herb Society has done in the last few years. And I would invite you to go and look at the silent auction items, because that too is a good way to bring money into the organization. And I know that some of the things that this group has accomplished over the years they've just been wonderful. And one of my favorites was the tortoises down in by Alamos. Whatever that group was, and Dr. Jarko encouraged me to help that out. And somebody's nodding their head, and I can't remember the name of the town, but it's I said Alamos, but what?
Well, Ferris have put on.
Okay, whatever Maggie said works for me. And there was a woman named Mercy that Dr. Jarko encouraged me to help with her projects down there, and I did, because I really think that the turtles, though the reptiles and amphibians in general are kind of left out in the cold when it comes to funding animals. So I fund dogs too, but we really need to fund these herps because they need to be studied. And one of my friends here a long time ago, I met in music, is Tom Van Devener, and he kind of got me interested in the herps too. So Tom, thank you for that. And are we ready to go? I think Robbie has something to say to me.
One of the items in the silent auction is Cecil Schwalbe's frog necktie.
Oh, yeah.
Put that up.
And Cecil Schwalbe's crocodile picture too. I call it the crypto crocs because you can hardly find the crocodile in the picture, but it's a really cool picture. So when you're back looking, big. What did he say?
John's gonna pass the fire.
Oh, good idea. Thank you very much. He's gonna model it too. Are you gonna pass it around or?
He's just modeling it.
Yeah, you're modeling, okay. Misunderstood.
Well, they've all been voted,
Except,
except the write-in.
aha, how many?
Oh, I didn't count them. I was just making sure they were all the same. I still have to count these, sorry.
This is kind of like, what was that teapot dome scandal in New York? Where they made sure the votes were all right before they got in the ballot box. And there was one write-in, which was fantastic. I encourage that because we don't want to look like we all are. Except Patrick's table, he took care of that one to make sure everybody voted correctly. Uh-oh. Robert's got his pen out. I think he's changing votes. So I encourage you to go back and look at the silent auction. There's a few pictures there that Dennis Caldwell did also. And Dennis has been one of our charter members. He's been around forever. And is Arthur here? Did Arthur come? Okay, I got a message for you for him.
39
39
ballots.
ballots.
Yeah.
And all but one.
Yep.
Were for the slate as we projected it, or that's not the right word. I had one scotch. It's affecting me. I'm gonna have another before I leave. The proposed, the count, but for treasurer, there was one vote for Eric Hermanet. Do you know Eric? Oh, okay. You guys should talk afterwards. So that was he's a good guy. So talk to him. And Eric, thank you for making this election a little more interesting than it usually is. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Good. Thank you.
Only Lee can call me Robbie.
Sixth grade.
Yeah.
That's what I call it.
No, just call me anything except late for dinner. Thank you all for voting. It's a formality, these annual meetings, but they're important, and glad to know that you guys will show up for important things. We have our meetings recorded on YouTube, so if there's any you've missed or any that you want to revisit, you can go to our website. I have to apologize, Craig. I did not print out your bio, so I won't be reading from it. Craig has been a member of the THS since very early on. Was it 88 or what year? 88. So he was a member the first year that the Herpetological Society was started, 1988. So yeah, and he's not the only one early member who's here as well, but I'm glad to say we still have those first members or for the first several years of the organization who are still members. And so that's really wonderful. You're continuing a great legacy of regional herp societies. We are very well known for the Sonoran herpetologist. We stand out amongst all the regional herpetological societies. It's Tucson, Chicago, and now, unfortunately, the Maryland Society published a lot of things on Mexico, stopped running. I think they're defunct now. But we are in the top 3 of the nation's herp societies. Right? There's a lot of herp societies. And I will say that was it East Texas Herp Society is a pretty damn great group as well. Anyways, we are in the top small percentage of regional societies, so that's something that we're glad that you're supporting. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Craig, who is the Emeritus Executive Director of the world famous Arizona-Sonora Desert Museum, and he's going to talk to us about that institution. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Robert.
Oh, you talk, I'll stick it.
Okay. It's really close to hold, so I'm not going to do that. So as a brief bio, I was with the museum and still am for a little over 41 years. And I'll start off by apologizing if I wind up coughing. I wound up getting a cold from my wife when we were in Italy. She was doing work there. It was really cool. And then you come back and you're exhausted and suddenly you realize you know why. So hopefully I won't be coughing in the middle of this, but if I do, I'll take a short break and drink a bit more of that beer. And the second thing is that as much as I am serving as the Executive Director Emeritus and I'm still affiliated with the museum, the presentation that I'm giving, even though it's all about the Desert Museum and actually the way it kind of intersects with zoos and aquariums, as I get towards the end, the opinions that I state are my own. They are not cleared by Tom Weaver in the back, who's technically now my supervisor. So don't worry, Tom, it's not too salacious, but just so you know. And then I also want to apologize if you feel like you're on a ship trying to watch what's that screen that's going back and forth on the wall. Apparently that thing is wobbling up at the top. All right, so we're going to take a kind of a whirlwind tour of zoos in general and see where the museum intersects with that. And of course, these things go back millennia. You're looking at about 3,500 years back for the first zoo looking in Egypt. When they first came about, these were things that were about power and to be able to show other people in power, how powerful and how much reach you had by the kind of animals that you could actually have. That was one of the ways that they used as symbols. And so essentially animals were treated as objects, okay? Status symbols. If you fast forward up until about the mid-1700s, you see the first public zoo or zoo garden in Paris. They moved animals into the botanical garden, and that was one of the first times it actually became available to the public. The conditions for animals were still pretty horrific. And the shift, not just going to the public, but also looking at these things as something that we should be studying, it kind of shifted from an object to a subject. The oldest zoo in existence actually was built in 1752 in Vienna. It's still there. You can see the same concept of why it existed. From 1778 on, that's when they finally said, hey, let's let the public in, but notice that there's this little thing, only if they're decently dressed. I don't know exactly what that meant. Fast forward another couple hundred years, you get to the 1950s or so, and you see that conditions have changed some, but they're still not exactly what you consider fantastic for the animals. And essentially, animals are treated more as entertainment. So you have these different phases with power and what the function is of having animals in captivity. And as we move forward, even if you look at the Desert Museum when it opened in 1952, original enclosures for some of the animals weren't all that different. Okay, the same legacy of small enclosures for animals with not much thought about how much space they might need or what would be in them. Things have certainly shifted over time. So if you look at our exhibits now, this is maybe one of the best examples of that kind of looking into the valley through the mesh that is barely visible of the coyote exhibit. So being able to have something that is much more open air, naturalistic, and gives the sense of having no barriers is something that we have worked very hard at the museum. And that's where it kind of starts trying to blur the lines between what is not captivity and what is captivity. And in our opinion, and from some of the research it shows, is that when you have those kind of environments, it's something that you can actually take better advantage of the visual landscape and have more of an immersive experience so that people that are visiting you are going to have a more holistic perspective on where those animals are, what they do. There's more of a natural context that's involved with that, and that can actually feed into conservation and education efforts. Some of the exhibits we have, this goes back to the 1990s. It's an exhibit called Life on the Rocks. And there's some things about that that are fantastic and some that are just absolutely awful, okay? When it first opened, this is where we had lowland leopard frogs and this large space where you have plants and animals together, and we put a few frogs in there, and we have not been able to ever stop breeding them. They just breed like flies, okay? So worked well for them. Just across the way, where the skunk is, there's some small little burrows. So once again, you have designers that are looking at nature and saying, hey, all these animals, they live in burrows, so let's put them in little burrows. The problem with that sometimes is what an animal chooses to make a burrow in, what shape that is, what the exposure is. All those things are things that we may or may not know. Quite often we don't. And so our efforts to mimic it sometimes fall very short of that. And so the image on the right is actually of a tarantula exhibit. And it was this little burrow that went down, and, you know, female tarantulas are known to spend 20, 25 years in a burrow. Not that burrow, okay? Did not do well. So we stopped using it. There are some other examples that we've had over time where these little clamshell exhibits, because that's what you were trying to represent is, oh, that's what they look like, toads, they're hiding underground, etc. But we gave them no escape from those. So those didn't necessarily work so well. On the other side of the equation is, on the left-hand side, is a tiger rattlesnake. We've alternated between tiger rattlesnakes and speckled rattlesnakes. And in that particular case, the tiger rattlesnake that we kept behind the scenes for decades and never been able to breed them. And lots of people across this country really struggled in breeding that species. We set them up in this enclosure that is this outdoor glass with screen top and a tiny little sliver of rock crevice, and put them in there, and they breed every year, right? So there's times where you can try hard to mimic nature and fall very short, and other times you don't seem to try all that hard and it works well. In some cases, we've been able to create programs where animals are actually free for a short period of time, okay? And this starts to get at the heart of some of the challenges when it comes to having captive animals and what zoos are. This particular zoo, the institution, Zootopia, exists, but it hasn't actually been built the way this has been described back about 11 years ago, because the concept of Bjarke Ingels was to have something where you go through this spectrum of time of the traditional zoo to the safari, and you can see how the orientation of enclosure, what's enclosed, changes. And you get to the far right, and you would be led to believe that the animals and the people are roaming around freely together. Well, it's still an enclosure. So that right-hand side should still have a fence because it's just bigger. It's an illusion. And many of the things that we do are illusions. They don't plan to put people actually in with lions, at least not without some sort of protection. He has this idea, if you remember that movie, well, one of the Jurassic Park movies where they have those little pods the kids are in and they're, you know, racing around and there's dinosaurs running around with them. He has essentially that idea of being able to have putting them in with lions, elephants, etc. As I said, I think it's conceptual. I don't think it's actually been constructed. Be very interesting. But that concept of wild, and can you have an institution as a zoological collection of sorts. Can you make it wild or wilder? Is something that was explored in this symposium that actually took place at the museum. I forget what year that was, but we actually have a chapter that's featured in that, and it's looking at what we did as far as checking with our visitors to see what their perception was. And it's very interesting when you talk to people that are visiting the Desert Museum, where you can talk to them. And we had some researchers doing this at one time, and they said, "How do you feel about visiting the zoo today?" And I said, "The zoo? I'm not at a zoo. I don't like zoos." So their perception is that the museum is different from a zoo. And I would suggest that the museum is a zoo and a lot more. So it's a zoo, it's a garden, it's a natural history museum, it's a lot of things. But it does have captive animals that are on exhibit to the public who pay a fee to see it. And that's what zoos do. This is where we wind up where people, not just PETA, people have thoughts on zoos, and it has been building steam for decades, if not centuries, about people's perceptions of it's not okay to have animals in captivity. And there's more and more of that is in the mainstream media. There are people that are actually professionals out there that are actually have gotten on board with this for various reasons. So when you look at the zoo community, which in this country is represented by the AZA, Association of Zoos and Aquariums, it's about 250 organizations that actually member accredited organizations. They pivot and say, well, it's not about just having these animals here for you to come necessarily and see, but look at the audiences that they have. That's what they would first point to. They'd say you got over 180 million people in this country alone visiting zoos. In the entire world, 700 million people, okay? That's a lot. But what they're looking at is the potential for education, conservation education, getting people to shift their perspectives and care about animals and habitats because of an experience at a zoo. So that's where animals start to become what are considered ambassadors. It's another shift, a paradigm shift. They would also champion how much conservation zoos are directly responsible for, sometimes by actually doing the physical work, being in the field doing it, or working with others directly that are doing it. And in other cases, providing the money that those people need to do that work. And if you look at those numbers, I mean, those are significant numbers. The number of projects, the number of collaborators, the actual investment of almost $210 million. I mean, that's heavy hitting when it comes to the actual conservation value. And they've definitely taken on that being as animals as a protectorate. You know, this is now a group of things that we are championing for and trying to protect. It goes way back. The conservation of American bison in this country started with the Bronx Zoo, with the very first few that were being captive bred. And that eventually led to that species being brought back from the brink of extinction. Similar story up in the Phoenix Zoo with the Arabian oryx, where they've done this tremendous effort from, I believe, the 1960s forward, and it's been released back in the wild and it's spreading. Every zoo you look at that is accredited is either involved directly in work or supports work. And this is Tom's alma mater as well as Brent's, that the Denver Zoo. They have a tremendous number of programs. So there's a lot of amazing work that is being done at these institutions about conservation. Going back to that place from 1752 that still exists today, if you were to look at their website, you find out there's about 9 species that they're directly involved with. Okay, so they've all gone through an evolution and they do different things, but the foundation of zoos today is based on conservation education and conservation work. That concept of conservation is another one that has been explored in seminars that the museum participated in. We produced a chapter that's actually in that looks at zoos and aquariums as conservation organizations. And then a colleague of mine, Debbie Kolodner, and many others on this paper also talked about what do we have to show for our efforts of 70 years of collaborative work on conservation. So I wanted to just go over a little bit of that, and I don't want to be too redundant because a few of you have probably been here for other meetings and you heard Tom or you heard Courtney talk about specific projects within the Herp department. So I wanted to kind of pull back and look at things a little more broadly and a little deeper in time, just to talk about the variety of conservation efforts that the museum has been involved with. And the first one begins with this gentleman on the right, who is, of course, working with animals in a way we don't quite do anymore. Certainly not with black bears, but that's Lou Walker. And this is a guy that I'd heard about for decades, who had worked with bringing people down to the Gulf of California and showing them Isla Rosa and talking about these 3 species of birds and talking about how the bulk of their breeding habitat is that single island in the Gulf of California. And that eventually became the first preserve in Mexico, okay, in the Gulf of California, due to his efforts. Nowadays, if you look, about 40% of the actual protected areas in Mexico are in the Sonoran Desert. So it's really neat to see that kind of infection of planting the seed and how it's grown and how much of it is in the Sonoran Desert region. So the museum's had quite an impact on different things that comes from habitat conservation, as well as working directly with species. Some of the first Mexican wolves who were bred in captivity were at the museum in the 1950s. Those bloodlines are actually out in the wild. But beyond that, they wrote the stud book, which is a way to manage populations that are spread around a number of institutions so that you can figure out which ones are overrepresented or underrepresented genetically, which ones need to be paired up, et cetera, so that you can have a thriving population for reintroduction. And then in talking to state and federal agencies, they're the ones that actually said the Desert Museum was at the heart of actually creating a plurality of support with the public. And that's what gave agencies the feeling that it's safe to step out with the concept of reintroduction of Mexican wolf. And then the director of the museum at the time, as well as the chair of the board, went to the Arizona Game and Fish Department and actually advocated for the reintroduction program. And I have no way to be able to verify this, but what I was told is that the vote was looking at it was going to be 3-2 against, and it passed 3-2 in favor. So it's really neat to see some of the positive things that have come from the museum historically. These days, if you go from the last 30 or so years up to the present day, our work focuses in these kind of 4 different arenas. You're looking at things that are related to pollinators, long history of working with that. Resilient food systems are a new element that's been added, and then of course saving habitats and saving species. So I'm just going to run through very quickly what we're doing today when it comes to those particular areas of work. Invasive species. They're something that are critically important for us to pay attention to. One of the longest running ones that we have been working on for decades is bufflegrass. And if you look at hillsides, you guys, I'm not going to give you this speech that has probably been heard by almost everybody in this room more than once, but this is a highly problematic weed that has been introduced to the Sonoran Desert and has the potential of creating Sonoran savannas if it's left unchecked. So the museum, along with tons of other agencies, organizations, and government as well, have been involved in trying to control it. And now there's things like stinkweed and others that are stink net. These things are really important for us to be able to try and keep them at bay. So that's habitat protection, looking at the diversity of pollinators, especially when you're looking at bees and wasps. This is one of the most biodiverse places in the world, but nobody's really studied that much. So U of A, Pima College, the Desert Museum, and others have collaborated to identify species just to understand what's out there. Food systems, this is where we start looking and trying to remind people that we are part of the ecosystem. We're not apart from it. And we can do that quite often by talking to them through their stomachs. And we can look at that and say, that maybe looking at plants that have been in this region for millennia and are desert adapted would be better fits for agriculture than the things that we try to grow in Yuma with 4 inches of rain. When it comes to the saving of individual species, this is sort of under the moniker of, with AZA again, of saving animals from extinction. There's a lot of things that are out in the field, but a lot of these efforts are what are considered ex situ, which means just outside of the place that the animal or plant is naturally in and wild in, and having them in captivity. And those can be for a variety of reasons. One of them is to have a refuge population where you say, we're going to hold something for if and when. Maybe it's okay now. Maybe someday you say this thing has got such a small range that if this population disappears, we need something to reintroduce it with. So zoos and aquariums like the museum hold species. It can be short-term salvage. Fire hits Mount Lemmon, bring the fish into captivity, hold them till the water quality returns to normal, take the fish back. Times where you're looking at, well, there's still some of them left, but we need to breed them so that there's more of them so we don't lose that species. Or in some cases, which is pretty rare, where you're actually producing something that is gone and trying to replace it with a reintroduction. So lots of species on the aquatic and semi-aquatic and terrestrial, and from plants and invertebrates to, lots of fishes, amphibians, and reptiles, and an occasional bird and mammal. Longest running when it comes to this species is San Esteban chuckwallas for us, which go back to the 1970s. We've produced over 400 animals. This is one that is listed as an Appendix 1 endangered species. They have never been taken from captivity back to the wild because that population seems to be doing well. But naturally, it occurs on one island. It's been introduced by people to a few others. But this is that what if concept of having something in captivity. Tarahimara frog, I see Mike Shuttle here. Mike and I were ones on this thing from 1992 forward, getting involved with trying to reintroduce a species that disappeared in the early 1980s. Robert, I'm going to try and do this. I hope I don't blow it. It worked. Technology is my thing, yes. This frog disappeared. The museum brought them into captivity. This is one that had never been bred in captivity. Turned out it was not hard. You just need to give them the space and enough food to do so. Funniest thing, I think, is when we got the first tadpoles and we thought, okay, cool, we got about 1.5 to 2 years to figure out what we need to do with these things as frogs, because that's what the literature said. It took that long for them to go through being a tadpole to a frog. That's how long it takes in the wild. When you have constant food and warmer temperatures, it takes 11 months to go from a tadpole to a breeding frog. And so all of a sudden we realized, oh, this is ahead of schedule. And it was not something that was authorized. So when we got these things breeding in the year 2000, the state had not signed off on releasing them into the wild for another year. And I was very fortunate to have Mike and Jim Warbaugh and others that I could work with and say, find a place for these frogs, because I can't keep them all here. So a population was established at the Kofa National Refuge. So this is, okay, now we're doing something wrong. Thank you. There goes my cover. But many of us were part of the initial releases into Big Casablanca Canyon. Mexican garter snake, similar story, except it hasn't completely disappeared. So the staff today are, and have been for 15, 20 years now, producing these. And up to about 250 have been produced, and over 200 of those have been taken back to the wild. When you work at institutions like the museum, this is what you dream about doing. You love to be able to tell people, we were a part of that. It wasn't just hypothetical, someday we might do something really cool. It was really done. Snowy mud turtles, we've bred those as well. So Robert, why is it telling me to view the people?
Just keep talking.
Okay, I'll keep talking. I don't want to view the people. No offense to anybody online. But so we were asked to hold 30 turtles initially. And then eventually when the Phoenix Zoo pulled out of that program, we were holding close to 70 turtles. I don't know if you've ever kept aquatic turtles. They're really, really dirty. It's a pain in the ass, okay? So having 70 of those things was just over the top. So eventually they figured out what was going with the Quito reservoir, which had been draining. They figured out why, they got it to stop. They took a bunch of them back and they said, hey, why don't you keep some of them and see if you can reproduce them? They've never been reproduced in captivity, so okay, sure. So we did that. We've got about, what, 25 of them or so? Yeah. And the idea was they were going to be released back in the wild. We've been recently told that's not likely to happen because the habitat is so small and the population that's there is doing okay. They don't think there's space to actually accommodate those right now. So right now we're holding them and who knows how long. And one of the things where I always have fun with people that are not at a zoo like us is they sort of forget that animals are not robotic. They don't have on and off switches. And so we've had times where we'll get a call from somebody at an agency. No offense, Mike, but we would get a call and say, hey, can you not breed those this year? They might be carrying sperm from last year. They might breed for 2 or 3 or more years. So we can't just shut them off. And sometimes once we've done that, and Mike didn't actually make the call, so don't look at me. But then you get to where you start trying to get them going again. It's not so easy. So once you get one of these projects going, you want it to go and go until it pretty much comes to conclusion. And that's the challenge with these is they're long-term approaches and that the objectives over time might change, but our methodology at an organization like this may not be very easy to accommodate it. Most recently is a project that was added with New Mexico ridge-nosed rattlesnakes. And this is a combination of captive breeding with the concept also of assisted migration. So some of the animals were actually taken from Mexico and directly translocated into New Mexico. And then 3 zoos, San Antonio, LA, I believe, and the Desert Museum have 10 each that they're supposed to try and breed so that there's more, so that we can keep the population in New Mexico from disappearing. So that gives you an idea of some of those things that have been going on at the museum for, in some cases, short periods of time and other times for decades. Now, that's all on that conservation side, but this gets to a point where when you're looking at having animals in captivity, it winds up where there's a point of tension. And that's because when you're looking at conservation, it focuses on species, it focuses on populations. Individuals are important, but that's not the focal point of what you're doing. And animal well-being, people that start paying attention, they're looking at individuals, every single animal that you've got behind your gates. And that's where the challenge comes, is where you're trying to balance all the good you're doing out there with what you're doing back here. And that's not to suggest that zoos and aquariums are doing things that are inappropriate, but there are times you have to make trade-offs, because back to the numbers equation, if Tom is going to be breeding garter snakes, he's not going to set up 50 garter snakes in walk-in enclosures. He can't do that. So they're going to be in smaller spaces. And those are going to be things where somebody might say, oh, I think it would like to have more space. And you say, yes. And I think it would also like to be alive in the wild. And so that's what they're always trying to do, is balance what you're doing, how you keep animals, how many you've got, with what's actually going on in the wild. Lots of people, zoo people and the lay people, are all paying attention to this more and more as time goes on. So public perception of zoos has changed, and it has diminished over time. I think it's sort of leveled off, but for a long time, it was just eroding a little bit at a time. And that's because of these concerns people have with what you're doing with these animals. And then also a feeling that we wind up as an industry being protective of ourselves and not being transparent with what's going on the other side of that enclosure or that gate. And the reality is there are times you have to be protective, because there's times where you just say, you wouldn't understand this if you saw it. So you're careful, because you have to be careful with what people can actually take in and what they do with that information. And we wind up in a defensive posture, and sometimes we go overboard as zoo professionals in kind of closing our ranks and not letting people in. My personal opinion is the more that we can be transparent and show what's going on and explain why, the more trust we'll build and the more actual support for conservation we'll have. When you guys, anybody that's in this room is probably either is or has kept reptiles for a hobby or for a living. And when you do this, you know that just understanding the physical environment of these animals is a challenge. Trying to understand with a lizard or a turtle is how much UV it needs. Is it UVA, B, C? What's the heat? What do we have as far as the thermal gradient? What kind of substrate is it on? Does it hibernate? Does it not hibernate? All these things that go into just understanding the physical being are tremendous. And we don't even know enough about that today when it comes to the broad range of species we're supposed to work with. This was a relatively recent edition of Health and Welfare of Captive Reptiles. And in it is a really, really good chapter. If you've not read this chapter, I highly recommend it. Robert Mendek is one of the primary authors, and it pokes into how all of us learn about what we're doing. And when I say we, I am one of those people. I learned from somebody else who learned from somebody else who learned from somebody else. And there's all sorts of things that we learn that have not necessarily been verified, but we just take it on faith. And so we think, and I used to tell this to people that would come visiting and say, when they saw this beautiful room of racks with the small shoe boxes and sweater boxes with all of our snakes in them, and they'd say, oh, that poor snake. And it's, oh, it's fine. Yeah, they're fine. They love that. Do they? Well, I was very convinced through my training that this was the case. Turns out a lot of that stuff has not necessarily been demonstrated. Okay? People like Gordon Burkhardt, who's featured in many things, and especially in this book, has definitely been looking more at the social side. And that's part of where I'm kind of bridge to as I go on here, is that we focused a lot on the physical environment of animals. When it comes to lower vertebrates in particular, we've kind of ignored social, psychological, and emotional. And this is, I think, a really important thing to consider. It's not what you actually know that'll hurt you. It's what you know for certain that just ain't so. We will stand and say, oh, that's just the way it is. And then if somebody really were to find us after a few beers, we go, well, I'm not really sure about that. So starting to look at animal intelligence. And believe me, I've been working with lower vertebrates for 42 years. And the number of people that nobody ever looks at the reptilian brain as a compliment, okay? You don't say to somebody, oh my God, you have an amazing reptilian brain. We know what that means. That means it's small and it's primitive and it's fight or flight. Not that you're fully developed. You're not a higher order of life because that's what you have as a brain. It's very unfortunate because a lot of those assumptions are just not true. But these thoughts about animals and people and what actually constitutes a sentient being and what actually qualifies for personhood are now court cases. As in the case with Happy the Elephant, Bronx Zoo won their case. The complainant would say that the elephant lost in the case because they were trying to establish that this is an animal that is actually a being, not a thing. And through the courts, that would be recognized as personhood. And there are rivers that have personhood, okay? So it's not just a matter of whether it's human, whether it actually has that status. There are other cases that are pending. So when you start looking at animal behavior research, the reason we don't know all that much about reptiles and amphibians is because the focus of work has been there with birds and there with mammals. About 76% of the studies that have been done in animal behavior are in those two areas. Very little of it focused on invertebrates or lower vertebrates. And there are papers that have been written recently about taxonomic bias in animal behavior research. And yet, if you look at today, they found that this Florida carpenter ant actually instinctively performs amputation. So one ant goes up to another one. I'm making up the conversation, of course, like, dude, I got a problem with my leg here. Can you cut it off? And the ant says, well, if it's to the upper leg, yes. If it's to the lower leg, they don't do that. If it's to the lower leg, they just have an antibiotic that they create of their own that they apply. Is that intelligence? Suzanne Simard up in Canada has been looking at trees, and she's a biochemist. And she took a lot of heat from people saying that you're just this woo-woo, touchy-feely person. So she did the biochemics to show that actually mother trees are working with mycorrhiza, and that there's communication going back and forth saying, let me in, I'm not going to hurt you, and that the roots open up to these mycorrhiza. And those mycorrhiza actually help her provide carbon to other baby furs, and they send more to the ones that she's related to. There's communication. There's understanding. Looking at tomato plants, they now have been documented as if they're attacked by an insect, they will go and send out a chemical signal to the rest of the tomato plants like, dude, protect yourself. It's not just cool. There's a lot going on. We just don't understand. And we're starting to look at this more when it comes to reptiles. So it's like just with enclosure size, how important is it? For decades, I had people that would visit me from Holland and from Germany and say, we would never be allowed to have something as small as you do have at the Desert Museum here. They had standards that said an animal must be able to stretch out. Studies are showing that's kind of important. Recently, there was a paper published on ball pythons. We all know that there's been a lot done with pit vipers, looking at maternal attendants and family groups and stuff that's coming to the fore. But what about egg-laying snakes? So they did a study where they had 6 ball pythons with 6 hide boxes, and all 6 of them went into one hide box. They took that hide box out, and all 6 went to another hide box. People like Max and others in this room have actually found that you can put this on display and take these maligned animals and actually make it a really engaging way for people that are in the public to know what's going on and potentially to learn about something that they thought had no, I don't care about those things. I don't want to know about those things. More and more people are logging on. So I find it fascinating that we, for millennia, have looked to the cosmos and to the heavens and said, let's look for intelligent life. We were looking the wrong direction. Look at your feet, and you can find it all around. We just have to change what we're using as a perspective of what intelligence truly is. So this gets to the point where we start looking at how do you actually design enclosures and institutions that look at animal agency, which basically means give it choices to make its own decisions. And for them to be, here we use the word, happy. I have a colleague, Stéphane Poulain, who said, you know, I can be in a room like this and a bunch of you could be on Prozac. You know, I don't know if you're happy, let alone a squirrel or a snail. So it's not easy to do this stuff, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying. Desert Museum published its most recent master plan in 2023, and it came up with this as its vision, activating voices for the desert. And this is where you start shifting to where you're looking at animals as individuals and trying to understand how do you make their lives better. So where you start seeing this featured is in the current exhibit that's being built right now with Spadefoot Splash, and having 2 large enclosures for otters instead of one single one, and having the possibility of having more than one otter together. Or if they don't get along, because there's no guarantee, you can separate them and you can rotate them through it. Eventually, the Mexican wolf, which really led us down this road of exploring this, because we looked at our current Mexican wolf. We brought in an agency out of Portland to do some research. And as the executive director at the time, you know, you're hoping they come back and say, oh yeah, your exhibit is not bad. And with just a little modification, you're perfect. And what they told me is this exhibit will never be good for the wolves. You need to completely replace it. So we went from something that you hope to spend $500,000 to $5 million. This exhibit that you're seeing here that is just in the design phase is about 8 times the current wolf size. Eventually, we get to reptiles and amphibians, because even in zoos, there's a pecking order, and it always starts with mammals and birds and eventually gets to reptiles, even when you have a director who's a herpetologist. But trying to design so that you're designing with nature, you're never exactly the same, but you can mimic it as closely as possible, that you can encourage species-typical behaviors, and then you can actually support the entire being, not just whether it actually lives a long life, eats the food it's supposed to eat, and reproduces, which are the criteria that we traditionally use as herpetologists. If these things lived, ate, didn't rub their noses looking like they wanted out all the time, and they reproduce, like, whoa, man, they're happy. I won't get into groups of people that are incarcerated that still are interested in reproduction. That does not equate to happiness, does it? All right. So we have to recognize the individuality of these animals, that they have unique personalities, if we use that term. They have increased cognitive capacities, and we can enhance animal welfare if we start paying more attention to that. So we are at the museum involved in some projects right now that are on animal behavior. Very fortunate to get a grant that would support this. And it focuses initially on those 2 species, desert tortoise and Sonoran whip snake. When you look at the entire realm of animal well-being, we are focused on one little piece of it, just the environment, the physical environment and the social environment. We're not going to be looking at all these other things. This is going to feed into it later on. This is an outgrowth of something that I actually sort of accidentally started at home during the pandemic. I was sitting there with this enclosure with the king snake in it, staring at it every day, and it staring back at me. And I always questioned, after 10 years of that snake being in this 2 by 2 by 1.5 enclosure, doing fine, would you like to leave if I gave you the option? So I drilled a hole in the top, put a tube just over the enclosure to the other side, and it'd go up in the tube and sit there. You're like, okay. So then I decided to say, let's make the tube go up to the ceiling and just give you a place up in the ceiling where you can hang out. First time it went up there, I thought it died because it was there for 18 hours. I was like, I think I did something wrong. No, apparently it just liked it. Then I said, let's make another enclosure. Took a window that was actually adjacent to our master bedroom and turned that into a vertical enclosure. And then I said, you know what? Let's go and drill a hole through the side of the house outside I have a very, very accommodating wife. She's fascinated by this stuff as well. And the tube goes up to another enclosure in here. It's not the prettiest thing. I have to kind of disguise it so when the dog's out there, he's not looking at the snake trying to jump at it. I've seen it out there a couple times. It's up against the roof, so quite often it's pretty toasty. And then about 3 months ago, I took this little enclosure and I said, you know what, let's go and make it bigger. So now there's a space that's 5 feet by 3 feet by a foot connected to all these other ones. Snake spends time everywhere. And I reached out to a colleague of mine, Cheryl Meehan with the Aware Institute, and I said, you know, this is interesting, but I can't say why it's doing this. I don't know if this has any value. And she goes, don't stop. She goes, it has value. You can't say why it's using it, but you can say it is using it. And you can say it's using it even when you're in the room because it moves all over and shows that it's comfortable with doing so. She goes, so, you know, it has value. So when I started thinking about this, after visiting the Philadelphia Zoo, and they have this, I forget what it's called, Big Cat Adventure or something, they use tubes. Louisville Zoo does the same thing, connecting 2 enclosures for bears. Nobody's really doing this, and I apologize for the formatting. I'm going from PC to Mac, you chop off words. So nobody was really doing that with lower vertebrates. And so the intent of the work we're doing is where we can actually learn how to speak reptile. Or I guess I should say we should really learn how to listen and hear reptiles when they speak to us, because they're telling us. We just need to understand how to interpret their language. What we're trying to learn is what's normal for them. What has meaning to them as a living being? And beyond need, what do they want? And what would possibly get them to where they can actually thrive and be happy? So these 2 studies are focused on desert tortoise and Sonoran whip snake. This is our javelina exhibit. We took 4 tortoises and we put GPS transmitters on them, and we've actually placed them in this enclosure. And now over time, we're just going to be monitoring where do they spend their time? What do they do? Do they have seasonal patterns? Do they do this stuff together? Do they stay away from each other? And this is going to take years to be able to just look at that data and say, okay, here are the patterns. This enclosure is supposedly around 20,000 square feet, and they came from something that was about 200 square feet. What I find most fascinating is that I've seen tortoises active in this 20,000 square feet as much as I ever did in that 200 square feet. So as a visitor experience, actually, it's just as compelling or not, because you'll see one tortoise, you can't guarantee it. But the reality is we did not diminish the visitor experience. And over time, I think we can actually increase it. So the cool thing is if you're into this business, you go, well, you know what? We were going to have to build a new enclosure. Now we don't, because they can probably just stay there. 4 tortoises, transmitter, it's encased in epoxy. The little module that you connect to a laptop, data comes in these beautiful text files. You can almost read them. And then maps into Google Earth, which are kind of cool when you start looking at the cluster of dots. And I can actually, in real time, click on those dots to find out what day and what time of day that was, theoretically what the temperature was. But since the transmitter is on the top of the body, you can't really say that's their body temperature. But over time, we've got these 4 animals. We'll be able to say, okay, where are they spending their time? What are they doing? Sonoran whip snakes. First off, disclaimer, why did we choose Sonoran whip snakes? Because we had them. And because they exist in this region and are used to being in this climate. We had ideas of putting some really cool snakes in there. And then I started thinking, can I guarantee these things are going to stay alive? No. So let's use something that's really, really basic, that understands living right here in the Arizona upland desert scrub, and work with those. And Tom said, well, we've got these Sonoran whip snakes. And I think, okay, those have been kind of tough for us. You know, whip snakes and coach whips have been kind of tough to keep in captivity. Let's give it a whirl. So we have 2 snakes in there. They are named Jacqueline and Richter, okay? Where they came from is enclosures that you see on the right. What they've gone into is something that enclosure on the right now is about 4 to 4.5 times the size of one of the enclosures. And then there's this outdoor enclosure. They're connected by a tube, so there's indoor, outdoor. And then we've got temperature and hygrometer, so we can look at temperature and humidity throughout these 2 things. And then we start getting these things. We use security cameras. This is a really low-dough approach to this right now. We could have spent more, but when we had the option of spending less I thought, if you talk to people in this field and you tell them, oh, I got this really cool project, and if you got $500,000, man, you can do it too. 99% of people leave the room at that point in time because they're never going to have that kind of money for reptiles. But when I can tell them that for $3,000, we can get you set up, they're going to keep listening. So I think more of this work is going to go on. The data comes to us as images and video. This shows the male Richter actually in the tube, kind of looking inside after poking his head outside. This is the female wrapped actually around one of the cameras. I was wondering why I couldn't see her. It's because she was above the camera. She hides a lot this time of year. We're seeing some seasonal behavior. One of the fun things for me is I feel like we found a snake that actually understands a time clock because they punch in right around 7 a.m. and they punch out right around 5 p.m. and they're done. We've seen no activity at night. Maybe as we get into monsoon next year, it'll be different. But I've just been amazed that when you read things in the literature, it's a diurnal snake. I was like, sure as hell is. Fortuitously, we had another whip snake that laid 6 eggs, 4 of which hatched. And I excitedly went to Tom and I said, would you mind if we kept them together? And he said, sure. And Corina was very, very gracious in saying, well, how do you want to set them up? So we set them up. And we've seen certainly behavior where the animals will spend time by themselves. Sometimes not exactly where they're expected to spend their time. They are really tiny, and one of them found its way out of the enclosure. That's going up the Wi-Fi cable. Fortunately, went back. But what I found fascinating is that we've got these 4 babies, how much time they've spent together. Okay, so once again, you got this egg-laying snake that we've always assumed as they hatch, they're on their own, that's it. Maybe not. Once again, can I tell you what's going on there? No. All we can do is tell you it happened, and it kept happening. And even after they went through their first shed, we still see that there's some of this grouping going on. So what we're really doing is poking holes in what you might consider a paradigm, and accepted or believed things that haven't necessarily been proven. Now, with this project, well, that's really great. There's going to be a whole lot of limitations. One of them is my IT abilities. We have a minimal number of species that we can work with, and we have a minimal number of individuals per one. So is this ever going to be statistically significant? Likely not. It's very easy. We're working with 6 volunteers and multiple staff that have to take care of this and watch these things and then interpret what they're seeing. We can misinterpret things. We can overinterpret and overrepresent. There's all sorts of things that can go wrong with this as we move forward. The data itself just might be that we get so much, we go, I can't even take the time to go through all, okay? So there's a lot of risks when it comes to this. But what we'll be able to do with this is change how we actually care for the animals that we care so much about. We'll be able to design and build better environments for them as we move forward. And as we look at that reptile concept we have for future exhibits, they're going to be much better informed as we go to build them by having this information. And we're going to be applying this to multiple species over time. So ideally, it's going to improve the lives of the animals in captivity. It's going to be something that if we do this stuff, it improves our favorability ratings with the public because it shows we do care. We are trying to find out what we don't know, and we will apply it. And then it's going to improve the success of conservation, at least in my opinion, because I think we can actually create much more compelling exhibits than we currently have. Because when you give animals spaces and a place to go, they move more. And if you come into our reptile exhibit area right now and you see 14 snakes and lizards, they're generally going to sit there. And that's all you'll see. And if you're a Herp person, you're going to go, oh my God, I got to see a Tarahumara mountain king snake. You're like one of an infinitesimal number of people that care about that. Most people that come to this institution, they're not aware of it, they don't care, and they probably never will. But for us to be able to take those things and have them doing something, that's going to be more engaging. And I think that it's going to create not just better exhibits, but it's going to create connection points for people so that they have more of a feeling of these are not little automatons, these are living beings. And they are not humans, they're not people, but they're not things. So the conclusions of all this, what we expect is we're going to expose that there's knowledge gaps in what we consider as reality today. We're going to facilitate paradigm shifts over time. We're going to wind up with more questions than answers. And I'm hoping what we can do is allow for possibilities. So I just saw that picture, that Stephen Cumberworth shared with me of just how goofy that ridge-nosed rattlesnake looks. And for us to allow them to be exactly that, be a goofy little critter. All right. The German-born English economist E.F. Schumacher said, "We can only see what the eye has grown to see." So just imagine what happens if you put blinders on, the stuff on the left and the right disappear. You will be ignorant that it's there, even if it's right next to you. What we're trying to do is pull away the blinders so that we can actually see what's around us. Getting back to that concept of intelligence and looking at animals and thinking about humans, there's this whole spectrum. And whether you look at it from a religious or from an evolutionary perspective, human beings have this exceptionalist perspective of ourselves as above everything else. And that's what gives us the right to do whatever we want with them in some people's minds. What I'm asking for is for us to reevaluate that and to realize they're not human, but they're not things. These are sentient beings, just like us. And if you look at the technical definition of personhood, it actually pretty well applies to them. So it's time for us to elevate. And this article, my wife just shared with me, it came out yesterday. And I just love it. Last Frontier of Empathy, Why We Still Struggle to See Ourselves as Animals. So rather than seeing animals as we're trying to elevate them to people, is to understand, especially if you believe in evolution, we are just really advanced reptiles. Okay? We came from them. So a lot of the primitive things that they have in them, we carry. Emotions, thoughts, many different things are in those beings. And what I'm asking for is for us to actually allow that to be possible and to grow from it. And I just wanted to thank a bunch of people that actually have over time. I wrote this as, mentors, advisors, and provocateurs, and the people that poke you through your career and make you think. John Lee Compton is a person that has been very supportive and provided us with the grant to actually do the work we're doing right now. Very thankful for him. This is an individual that I found named his snakes on his property, and I was like, I need to get to know this man. How many people do you know that are actually into reptiles that can actually support this kind of work? I haven't met many. And all the staff at the Herp department, as well as the executive director and director of collections, that have taken a person like me that retired as an executive director but didn't really want to go away. Just wanted to change what work I focused on, and for them to be open. And Tom in particular, to allow a former executive director to come into his building and be there, that takes an exceptional human being, because we are often loathed and feared. And the last thing you want to do is invite them into your building. So thank you, Tom. Thank you, Corinna, all the people that have helped, and thank you for your attention. And I don't know if you've got people that have questions or not. Certainly, if you have questions, feel free. And you can always, yes.
So
Larry.
something I'm really interested in this museum is kind of what a early slide you had where animals and the animals and the people were running and creating together kind of thing.
Yes.
But I view the Desert Museum as kind of an oasis and maybe a resource for animals, especially because things like lizards are really small. And unlike a African lion, they won't eat you or anything. But so you have the zoo, but you have this huge area of the more or less a native environment, but it's also got trees and extra shade and extra water, things like that. So you have all these communities of native animals, which may differ somewhat or may be similar to the areas outside who get brought out. That's something I've been talking to Tom about, exploring that. Kind of like you have a zoo within a zoo outside of a zoo. So.
You're right. Yeah. And I think that we're in a really fortunate position by being a regional organization that's located in the region it represents. So we're not sitting here with Galapagos tortoises in Minnesota. We're not sitting here with polar bears in, Phoenix. Okay. we don't have to worry as much about the thermal constraints of our environment because the things we have are adapted to it. Of course, they're adapted to the way it was, but it's going to be like 20 years from now is a different story. But I think we can do a much better job of highlighting the things that naturally occur in our grounds. And one of the ways we're going to do that, so I didn't show it, but one of the other things we're going to do as a future exhibit is to do away with our main aviary. We will move the hummingbird aviary, but make it larger. And then we're going to create a lot more plantings that bring in native birds and take advantage of things that show up and they don't need to be captive. And, you're right, lizards. There are some people that come out, and we did have one lady one time that when we said the rattlesnakes on the ground, we heard her running all the way to the entrance screaming. All the way from like the aviary up to the front entrance, we heard her screaming. But it's rare that they run away like that. Some are intrigued by it. Pretty much everybody is tolerant. And I think we can do a lot more to really highlight the natural biodiversity that's all around, that is kind of continuous with the adjacent Tucson Mountains. Mike.
Your two slides of humans as animals and personhood really got me thinking a lot about if you go back to the arc of bears dressed up in human clothes in zoos and performing, it's like, oh, were we giving them personhood? No. But now here's something that got me thinking about that, the arc of it. Ruby the elephant. Painted amazing, was Ruby a human artist? Was Ruby an elephant? What is going on? And was there the tragedy of Ruby and these other things when we are imbuing these qualities on animals? We don't know. We don't even know our own animal qualities. So talk about that conundrum right there.
I think you've done a good job of it yourself. I think you've done quite a good job yourself. But you're right. And I think that, I've seen videos. I remember when I first started at the museum in 1984, and I heard the Desert Museum has its own television show. So I watched it. And to be honest, I was a bit shocked by what I saw. But I will tell you that the gentleman that was doing that show, Hal Gross, is one of the reasons the Desert Museum became the institution it is. He established it essentially for us in our backyard. We were getting accolades from people visiting from afar, but he was the one that did thousands of programs out with schools. But I did see programs where he was dressing up rodents as a firefighter with a little chief helmet or stuff like this. And that's hard for me. I would have never done that kind of thing. But it does point out that we've always had that affinity to want to make them like us. And I think the challenge is for us to let them be what they are. Okay. And I guess I should really say be who they are. And what that requires is that we pay a lot of attention to understanding what that is and allow for the possibility to go way beyond. I love that, at least what I'd heard not too long back, is that humans have not been able to understand dolphin communication. It's above us. Okay. So the concept of where you sit, I just wish we could look at things laterally and not have to have some sort of paradigm where we feel like everything has to be plotted vertically, where what's on the top has greater value. It's just different. I used to do the venomous reptile program at the museum, and I said, hey, you want to really impress me? Lick the carpet and tell me if your aunt visited here today. The snake can do that. Okay. But one of the things that's kind of come about for me in thinking about this is that I used to spend my time in doing presentations talking about how special these animals were, because we're all fascinated by them. Ooh, look, this has infrared. It's got heat pits, and it can detect temperature, cool, warm, blah blah blah. Helps it with pitch black. It can hunt, etc. We talk about how they move around and they don't have legs and arms, etc. And as much as that is all true, I think that what happens is we are differentiating those animals from us as opposed to trying to show the similarities. So now I look at it and I think about how many times have I come in with a king snake and introduced you to king snake and talked about it as a species and as a subspecies and as a color form and as a biological life form of all these different abilities, and never introduce who she is. Imagine if we did that with a human being, and I said, this is a human being, and he's X number of years old, and humans live X number of years, and they have the capability of actually forming artificial intelligence, etc. And I never introduced you as Mike. I think Mike would be sitting there going, what the hell is this about? You didn't introduce me. So I think we need to introduce snakes as individuals, and that we're more likely to get people to think about them as closer to them, and the closer we can get them psychologically, not physically. It's not where you want to be draping snakes on people's bodies. It's the psychological and social closeness that I think really we need to focus on, so that we can realize that they have differences. But, you know, I mean, if you look around the world, what do we fear? Difference.
The German behaviorist coined the word Umwelt.
Yes.
You know, like seeing from the perception of another being, like seeing the perception of a termite, imagining yourself as a termite.
Yeah.
And Umwelt.
And in some cases, we certainly at that point in time don't have that capability. But then it's a matter of, all right, with our amazing brains on technology, can we figure out a way to get to a point where we can have something that we learn about it from its vantage point that we can't really? Yeah.
I'm glad to see you thinking about the social aspects of reptiles. You know, it's a very new field for humans, probably a very old field for reptiles. But that might lead you to some interesting places, just in terms of exhibit setup, just giving them some space and watching what they do. With that in mind, I would suggest keeping the aviary and putting coach whips in there. Very happy.
I know, that is a really, really cool idea. Yeah, yeah. So keep in mind, I am the ex-director, and I have no power, right? And I love it. But that is a really cool idea. Corinne mentioned that the other day, and I was thinking, I get so excited. I was like, oh, wait a minute, I'm the former director, and I can't do studio things. But it would be amazing. Yeah. Robert.
Well, I think that was a great presentation. So thank you for speaking to the group. You know, I think so much of our impact as ambassadors or co-ambassadors to the natural world hinges on our ability to tell stories. And if you can, people love to hear good stories.
Yes,
and,
they do.
And how do you do that without, as you say, objectifying the animal as the machine or this thing that is alien to us some way? That does have some value, but ultimately, you want to bring people to eye level with these animals. And I was recently hosting a person from Mexico who's a Nahuatl language speaker, and you know, a lot of not just Nahuatl culture, but many cultures fully accept and understand in that every animal, every tree, every rock, every river, it has its own umwelt. It has its own cosmos. You know, there's a snake sphere, there's a river sphere, there's a turtle sphere, and that goes into their word, how they talk and the words they give to those things. But I think zoos can take a cue from that is once you begin to fully accept that these animals have their own perception, their own world, their own language, their own whatever, and inform the way we move forward. I think that would be one of the big challenges.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, that venomous reptile program, I did that for like 20 years. And I got to a point where I was like, okay, you know, the audience still seems intrigued by this, but I'm not. I'm so tired of my own words. Like, God, I want to do this in some other way. So I wrote a very, very short, like a 2-page story. And I just said, Stefan and I would do the Cool Summer Night programs. And I said, okay, I'm only doing the Gila monster. I'm not doing rattlesnakes. You get all the rattlesnakes. I just want to focus on the Gila monster. And I wrote this little short story from the perspective of a Gila monster. And then I read it and I tried it different ways just to see. And I had people that I trusted to give me their honest opinion of what it was like afterwards. And the first time I did it, they said, that was really freaking weird. Because I did it to where you couldn't see me and I was this voice. And so there's Stefan is standing there working with the Gila monster, but Craig's voice is somewhere in the distance. And so I just saw people looking around going, who's talking? So then I said, okay, I got to do it 2 times at night. So the next time I got up and I sat next to Stefan and read it. My wife was there. She's very critical. She goes, that was much, much better. I was like, okay. And so I did that a few times, but it was from that very thing of trying to look at what you're talking about, Mike, is trying to understand life as a Gila monster takes you in, and life as a Gila monster taking in a human interaction, and to really understand how that Gila monster, what it's got on its mind going out for a summer evening is going to get food and find a mate. And it encounters this disgusting, large, foul-smelling beast that is a human that has been drinking beer, that reaches for it and gets bitten in the process. And so it's to try and reverse the perspective to understand why these things happen is because of our stupid behavior, not because of the lizard. But yeah, the stories, I think, have a lot of power.
I think it's no surprise to everyone here that our society has a bad case of entitlement, and that has a lot to do with how their attitude about animals and the natural world. It's a real, you really have to get used to flipping the narrative on people in a way that's respectful or not insulting.
Yes.
So many times there'll be a rattlesnake crossing the road at my work, and I stop the car and I make sure people let it crawl across the road. And the first thing out of someone's mouth when they say, watch out, there's a rattlesnake, and I say, oh, it's fine, I work here. They said, well, grab it. And then I say, what for? And they don't have an answer for it. And so I think it's so important for all of us here, especially as protectors of these animals, to start thinking about how we can very gently bring the mirror up to people in a way that's not condescending. And of course, I know that's what you do. I guess I'm saying it's a big challenge.
It is, but I'm glad you see it that way, Robert, because it's really important that there's enough that we can see around this country right now. Is that like if you try to put somebody's decisions in front of them and you do it in a way where it's inflammatory, they're gone. Okay. And, so that's why with this, it's a matter of letting these animals show us things that we go, didn't know to do that. And then trying to interpret it. But just being able to see that and understand, oh, wait a minute, these things are not just little piles of flesh sitting in an enclosure. It actually loves to go all over this. And I have this idea, I don't know if the current administration will ever go for it, of those tubes that I have at home, doing that with a Western Diamondback. So when you come in, it's suspended over your head. You remember the show Fear Factor? So there's going to be people that come in and go, I survived the reptile room of the Desert Museum. So there are going to be those. There's going to be some that never go in, but there already are. Those people are probably not going to come in either way. And then there's going to be a bunch of other ones that are coming in like, oh my God, look at this. I think it would be just stunning to look up and be able to see a snake going from one enclosure to another out of reach.
I would even say through technology, when you leave the museum, you can tell how many rattlesnakes people walked by and didn't know it. Yeah. And how close they were to it, or how close they were to the trail.
Yeah. It's been fun when we've been doing projects. We had 6 rattlesnakes with transmitters in at one time. And we knew that at the restaurant, there was one that was overwintering right under the path that people were all walking back and forth. Like, this thing is done for the year. It's not going to do anything. But it was just fun telling people. It's like, there's a rattlesnake right under where your table is. Like, what? It's like, yeah. I remember one time I was involved with a show that was called Myths of the Desert. And I was visiting family in California and really good friends of theirs. This lady, she goes, oh, Craig, I'm so glad to meet you. I've been wanting to ask you, is it true And you're like, here it comes. If you put a horsehair rope around your campsite, then it's going to keep snakes away. And I said, no. No? Well, that's it. I'm not going out there again. And I said, so Diane, how many snakes have you seen? None. And I said, it's not because of the rope. Okay? And I showed her the show about myths, and afterwards, I mean, she kept camping. But it's just interesting, the perspective is one guy said, well, what if I put a row of bricks around my, will they climb over it? Yes. What if I put 2 bricks around it? I was like, man, unless you got like 30 bricks and no gaps, not gonna work. But they just have this perspective that what made them safe, and what made them safe was the snake, all along. So that's our job, is constantly trying to remind people of what these animals are really about. And that's what I'm really hopeful, is that we can get to where the more tender side of these animals can be exposed. And that's where I think we can start to lean into similarities to us as species. Thank you all.
Well, thank you again. The silent auction will close at 8:40.
8:40?
Yeah.
And let me just quickly tell you what to expect when that happens. When Lee calls the closure, 2 or 3 of our folks are going to come in with marking pens, and you're going to have to step back, and they're going to mark them off on the bid sheets. So please, as soon as they do that, come back in, see what you won, pick up your bid sheets. You can pick up the merchandise too if it's not too heavy. Bring it over to us, and we will accept your payments, and we will keep the bid sheets. We need those for our data, so everybody understands